Did your parents control your life? My mother scheduled every minute of my existence in 15-minute increments from the moment I turned 6, color-coding activities in a 3-ring binder she updated weekly and posted on my bedroom wall where I could see exactly what I was supposed to be doing at any given second. Red meant academics, blue meant physical training, green meant approved social interaction, yellow meant mealtime with specific calorie counts listed, and purple meant sleep exactly 7 hours, no more, no less. Deviation from the schedule resulted in what she called correction sessions, where I'd stand facing the wall while she explained in her calm therapist voice why structure was the only thing preventing me from becoming a failure like my father, who she'd divorced when I was 4 for lacking ambition and discipline. The schedule started simply enough with homework time and dinner at specific hours, but by age 8 it included wake up at exactly 5:30 in the morning, 30 minutes of calisthenics she supervised with a stopwatch, shower precisely 8 minutes, breakfast of measured portions she'd calculated based on nutrition journals, then school where she'd arranged for my teachers to send her hourly updates on my behavior and participation. After school meant piano lessons Monday and Wednesday, advanced mathematics tutoring on Tuesday and Thursday, Mandarin lessons on Friday because she said bilingual children had better career prospects, and Saturday was split between chess club in the morning and supervised reading of pre-approved books in the afternoon. Sunday was reserved for reviewing the week's performance and planning optimization strategies for the next week. She'd installed cameras in every room of our house except the bathroom, and even there she'd put a timer on the door that beeped if I stayed longer than the allotted time for various activities she'd researched and determined were optimal. 3 minutes for urination, 8 minutes for bowel movements, 8 minutes for showers as mentioned. She watched the camera feeds on her laptop while working from home as a therapist, which was darkly ironic given what she was doing to me. Anytime I deviated from the schedule, her voice would come through the intercom system she'd installed. "Ethan, you're spending too much time on that math problem. Move to the next one. Ethan, your posture is incorrect at the piano. Sit up straight. Ethan, you're reading too slowly. Increase your pace." My best friend Noah started noticing something was wrong around 5th grade when I had to decline his birthday party invitation because it wasn't on my approved schedule. He asked why I couldn't just ask my mom to make an exception, and I tried explaining that exceptions weren't part of her system, that she believed consistency was the foundation of success, that any deviation would create what she called schedule entropy that would cascade into failure. Noah looked at me like I was speaking another language. His parents let him play video games and watch TV and decide when he was hungry. The concept seemed as foreign to me as describing colors to someone blind. I didn't know life could work any other way because this had been my normal for years. The school counselor called my mother in during 6th grade after my English teacher reported that I'd had a panic attack when the fire drill disrupted my scheduled reading time. I'd been sitting at my desk hyperventilating while other kids evacuated because leaving the building wasn't in my 15-minute block and I didn't know what to do when the schedule broke. The counselor suggested I might benefit from therapy and more flexibility, and my mother responded with a 40-page document she'd prepared detailing her parenting philosophy, complete with citations from developmental psychology journals and testimonials from my teachers about my academic performance. She argued that my anxiety came from the disruption, not from her structure, and that the solution was teaching the school to respect my schedule better. The principal actually sided with her after reviewing my straight A grades and test scores that placed me in the 99th percentile across all subjects. He told the counselor that whatever my mother was doing was clearly working from an academic standpoint, and that perhaps I just needed help managing unexpected situations within my structured framework. The counselor tried arguing that grades weren't everything and that my social development was suffering, but my mother had prepared for this too. She showed him the green blocks on my schedule proving I had allocated social time, and argued that quality of interaction mattered more than quantity. She'd researched optimal social exposure for children and determined that I needed exactly 3 hours per week of peer interaction to develop appropriate skills without wasting time on frivolous socializing. What nobody at school knew was that my approved social interactions were supervised and scripted. My mother would arrange playdates with children of parents she deemed appropriate, usually other high-achieving students whose parents shared her philosophy about structured childhood. She'd sit in the room with us ostensibly reading a book but actually monitoring our conversation and activities. If the interaction deviated from educational or character-building activities into what she called time-wasting entertainment, she'd intervene. I learned to steer conversations toward acceptable topics like school projects or books we were reading. The other kids learned this too, and our playdates felt more like study groups than fun. Noah stopped accepting invitations after the 3rd time my mother interrupted our Lego building to suggest we discuss the engineering principles involved. By 7th grade, I'd stopped trying to have friends outside the approved circle. It was easier to accept isolation than to constantly explain why I couldn't hang out spontaneously or attend events that disrupted my schedule. My mother noticed my withdrawal and responded by adding a line item to the schedule specifically for social skills practice. She'd enrolled me in a youth leadership program that met Saturday mornings, which replaced my previous chess club time. The program taught public speaking and networking skills, which she deemed more practical than chess. She'd calculated that chess had served its purpose of teaching strategic thinking, and that continued investment of time would yield diminishing returns. Everything in my life was analyzed through this cost-benefit lens, where she determined the optimal allocation of my hours to maximize my future success. The schedule intensified in 8th grade when I started taking high school courses. She'd convinced the school to let me accelerate in mathematics and science, arguing that keeping me with age peers was holding back my potential. This meant I needed transportation to the high school 3 periods per day, which she managed by adjusting her therapy client schedule so she could drive me. The commute time was converted into vocabulary study with flashcards she'd quiz me on during the 15-minute drive each way. She'd purchased a program that identified the most common SAT words and created a systematic study plan starting 4 years before I'd actually take the test. She believed in early preparation and compound advantage, often saying that students who started late could never catch up to those who'd been optimizing since childhood. My bedroom walls were covered with charts tracking my progress toward various metrics she'd established. Reading speed measured in words per minute with a target of 400 by age 15. Typing speed measured in words per minute with a target of 100 by age 16. Mathematical problem-solving speed measured in problems per hour across different categories. Physical fitness metrics including mile run time, push-ups in 2 minutes, and sit-ups in 2 minutes, all benchmarked against military standards she'd found online. She'd update these charts weekly in different colored markers, with red indicating below target, yellow indicating on target, and green indicating above target. My job was to move every metric into green and keep it there. Failure to maintain green status resulted in schedule modifications that allocated more time to the deficient area. The correction sessions were the worst part because they were unpredictable within the otherwise rigid structure. If I failed to meet a metric or deviated from the schedule, my mother would sit me down for what she called a performance review. She'd speak in her calm therapist voice while systematically identifying my failure, analyzing the root cause, and outlining the corrective action plan. These could last anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours depending on the severity of the deviation. She'd make me repeat back to her what I'd done wrong and what I would do differently next time. If my explanation didn't satisfy her, she'd make me try again until I could articulate the problem in a way that demonstrated true understanding of the failure. She said this metacognitive reflection was crucial for preventing repeated mistakes. High school started with my mother arranging for me to take 6 AP courses as a freshman, which required special permission from the principal and signed waivers about the workload. She'd submitted a detailed plan showing how my existing schedule could accommodate the additional academic demands by optimizing my study methods and eliminating remaining inefficiencies. She'd calculated that I was spending too much time on tasks that could be compressed, like eating meals that took longer than necessary or showering for the full 8 minutes when she'd read research, suggesting 5 minutes was adequate for hygiene. She adjusted my schedule to reclaim these minutes for additional study time. Every day had approximately 14 hours of scheduled activities between wake-up and mandatory sleep time, with the remaining time allocated to the mentioned 7 hours of sleep plus 3 hours of meals and personal care that she'd compressed as much as physiologically possible. My teachers were initially concerned about my course load, but my mother had met with each of them individually before school started to discuss her expectations and my capabilities. She'd shown them my test scores and work samples from middle school, along with the schedule proving I had adequate time allocated for each course. She'd asked them to email her weekly progress reports and to notify her immediately if my performance dropped below an A- in any assignment. She positioned herself as a partner in my education, offering to volunteer for school committees and donate to classroom supplies. Teachers appreciated her involvement at first, seeing her as the ideal engaged parent. What they didn't see was her reviewing every email and assignment at home, analyzing my mistakes, and conducting correction sessions when my work fell short of her standards. I got my first B+ freshman year on a history essay, where I'd misinterpreted a primary source document. My mother scheduled an emergency meeting with the teacher to review the grading rubric and understand where my analysis had failed. She took detailed notes during the meeting and then spent 3 hours that evening conducting a correction session where we reviewed historical analysis methodology and practiced with similar documents. She added a new line item to my schedule for daily primary source analysis practice, 15 minutes every evening after dinner. She explained that this B+ had revealed a weakness in my critical analysis skills that needed immediate remediation before it affected my GPA. She'd calculated that maintaining a 4.0 was essential for top-tier college admission and that any grade below an A- put that goal at risk. Noah and I had drifted completely apart by sophomore year since we barely saw each other and had nothing in common anymore. He'd joined the soccer team and was dating someone and going to parties, living the normal high school experience I couldn't access. I'd see him in the hallways sometimes, and we'd do that awkward head nod thing people do when they used to be friends but aren't anymore. Once he asked if I wanted to come to a movie that weekend, and I had to explain my schedule didn't have room for unplanned social activities. He looked at me with something like pity mixed with confusion and said he hoped I was okay. I told him I was fine because that's what I'd learned to say. Fine meant compliant with the schedule, which meant acceptable performance, which meant avoiding correction sessions. My mother decided sophomore year that I needed to add leadership activities to my resume for college applications, so she researched various options and determined that student government would be most valuable. She helped me prepare a campaign speech for class treasurer that hit all the key points about fiscal responsibility and efficiency. She designed my campaign posters using professional graphic design software and had them printed at her office. She coached me through practice debates and taught me how to make eye contact and project confidence. I won the election, and she added student government class treasurer to the running list of achievements she was maintaining in a spreadsheet. The position required attending meetings every Thursday after school, which she worked into my schedule by reducing my Mandarin lesson to 45 minutes instead of a full hour, calculating that I'd progressed far enough that the reduced time would still maintain my skill level. The college process started officially in January of sophomore year when my mother hired a private admissions consultant who specialized in Ivy League placements. The consultant charged $400 per hour, and my mother scheduled monthly meetings where we'd review my progress toward building a competitive application profile. The consultant said I needed a spike, some area where I demonstrated exceptional achievement beyond just good grades. My mother analyzed my metrics and determined that mathematics was my strongest area, so she enrolled me in a summer program at a local university for gifted students and began preparing me for mathematics competitions. She hired a tutor who'd competed successfully in high school to teach me competition strategies and problem-solving approaches. The tutor came to our house 3 times per week, and those sessions replaced some of my previous academic blocks in the schedule. I won 3rd place in a regional mathematics competition that spring, and my mother was disappointed it wasn't first place. She conducted a performance review, analyzing where I'd lost points and what skills needed improvement. She determined that I'd spent too much time on medium difficulty problems instead of quickly solving easy ones and moving to hard problems where the point values were higher. This revealed a strategic weakness in time management under pressure. She had the tutor focus our sessions on timed practice and strategic problem selection. She also increased my mathematics study time by 30 minutes per day, which meant reducing my sleep time to 6.5 hours. When I mentioned feeling tired, she showed me research about high-achieving adults who functioned on limited sleep and said I needed to build that capacity now while I was young and adaptable. Junior year felt like an acceleration into some kind of achievement singularity, where every hour of every day served the singular purpose of college admission. My mother had created a spreadsheet with target metrics for GPA, test scores, competition placements, leadership positions, and community service hours. She'd researched the profiles of students admitted to her target schools. She had 6 schools she'd determined were acceptable for me to attend, all in the top 15 of national rankings, and reverse-engineered what my application needed to look like. The spreadsheet had conditional formatting, so cells turned green when I hit targets and red when I fell short. She'd printed this and posted it next to the schedule in my room so I could see my progress toward college admission in real time. The pressure of seeing those metrics every day was crushing, but complaining wasn't an option because she'd point out that pressure was necessary for high performance and that comfortable people never achieved greatness. The SAT consumed huge portions of my schedule because my mother had determined that a perfect 1600 was necessary for her target schools. I took the test for the first time in December of junior year and scored 1520, which sounds impressive, but represented failure in her system. She hired a different test prep tutor who specialized in pushing high scores to perfection, and we analyzed every single question I'd missed to identify the patterns in my errors. She determined that I was making careless mistakes on math questions I definitely knew how to solve, which was a focus and time management issue rather than a knowledge gap. We added a new practice routine where I'd take timed sections every Saturday morning under test conditions, then spend the afternoon reviewing every problem whether I'd gotten it right or wrong to reinforce perfect execution. I retook the test in March and scored 1570, still not perfect. My mother scheduled a 3rd attempt for May and intensified the preparation. I finally scored 1600 on the May attempt, and my mother's response was to say, "Good," and move on to the next metric. There was no celebration or acknowledgement that this was a significant achievement. She explained that perfection was simply meeting the requirement, not exceeding it, so there was nothing special to celebrate. We needed to focus on the summer program applications and competition season and maintaining my 4.0 GPA through finals. I felt emptiness where I thought accomplishment should feel like something positive. Hitting the target just meant the target moved. My entire existence was oriented toward future goals that justified present suffering. And I was starting to realize the future goal would just become a new present that required more future goals. There was no end state where I'd be allowed to stop optimizing and just exist. My mother had applied on my behalf to a highly selective summer research program at a university 3 hours away. The program accepted 30 students nationwide for 8 weeks of intensive mathematics research under professor supervision. She'd helped me craft the application essays and provided letters of recommendation from my teachers and tutor. When the acceptance came in April, she scheduled a performance review to discuss what this meant for my college applications. She explained that successfully completing the program and producing research worthy of publication or competition would significantly strengthen my application spike. She arranged for me to live in the university dorms during the program, which would be my first time away from her direct supervision in my entire life. She seemed more nervous about this than I was, repeatedly reminding me to maintain my routines and not let the less structured environment derail my progress. The summer program started in June, right after my junior year ended. My mother drove me to the campus and helped me move into the dorm room I'd be sharing with another program participant. She'd packed everything I might need organized in labeled containers, including a printer so I wouldn't waste time going to the library, a coffee maker so I could optimize my morning routine, and multiple alarm clocks so oversleeping wasn't an option. She'd created a modified summer schedule for me that accounted for the program requirements while maintaining time for physical fitness, continued test prep for AP exams I'd be taking senior year, and her required weekly check-in calls every Sunday evening at exactly 7 p.m. She reminded me that this program was an investment in my future, and that I needed to make the most of every opportunity to impress the professors who might write recommendation letters. My roommate was a kid named Jeremy from California, who seemed confused by my organization system and the schedule I posted on the wall. He asked if I was in the military or something, and I explained my mother's philosophy about structure and optimization. He laughed at first thinking I was joking, then realized I was serious and got quiet. His approach to the program was completely different. He'd work intensely when inspiration struck, then take breaks to play guitar or watch movies or hang out with other program participants. He'd invite me to join group activities, and I'd have to decline because they weren't in my schedule. After a week, he stopped inviting me, and I'd hear him making plans with others in the hallway while I was at my desk working through my scheduled activities. I felt the familiar isolation of being different, of being structured when everyone else was spontaneous. The program itself was incredibly intense, even without my mother's additional requirements. We were expected to work on research problems that had no clear solutions, which was completely different from the structured curriculum I was used to where every problem had a right answer that could be reached through proper methodology. My research advisor, Professor Kenji Watanabe, had a collaborative style where he'd ask what I thought instead of telling me what to do. This threw me off because I was accustomed to authority figures providing clear direction and me executing it. When I asked him what approach I should take to a problem, he said that figuring out the approach was part of the research. When I asked what the optimal time allocation was for different aspects of the project, he looked confused and said research didn't work on a schedule. It worked when it worked. I called my mother during our scheduled Sunday check-in and explained my frustration with the ambiguous nature of research and Professor Watanabe's unhelpful advice to just explore different approaches. She listened carefully and then conducted a remote correction session over the phone. She explained that I was experiencing discomfort because I was in an environment that didn't respect proper structure, but that I needed to impose my own structure on the chaos. She told me to create a research schedule with specific milestones and stick to it regardless of whether the professor provided direction. She reminded me that the goal wasn't to do research the way Professor Watanabe wanted, but to produce results that would strengthen my college application. She suggested I might need to work additional hours beyond the program requirements to make up for the inefficient exploratory approach the professor advocated. I followed her advice and created a detailed research plan breaking down the project into components with specific completion dates. I worked 12-hour days in the lab, while other students took evenings off or went on weekend trips to explore the city. Jeremy started making comments about how I was missing the point of the experience, that the program was supposed to be challenging, but also fun, that we'd never get this opportunity again. I told him the opportunity cost of fun was too high when I needed to produce strong research results. He shook his head and said something about how my mother had really done a number on me, which I didn't fully understand. What number? She'd given me structure and discipline. She'd positioned me to succeed. The fact that it required sacrifice was obvious. Nothing worthwhile came easily. Professor Watanabe called me into his office halfway through the program to discuss my progress. He said my work ethic was impressive, but he was concerned about my approach. I'd been trying to force problems into frameworks I already knew instead of sitting with the discomfort of not knowing and letting new solutions emerge. He said the best researchers had tolerance for ambiguity and could follow their curiosity rather than a predetermined plan. I tried explaining my mother's philosophy about optimization and efficiency, and he listened politely before saying that innovation rarely came from optimization. It came from exploration, from trying things that might not work, from wasting time on ideas that led nowhere until suddenly one led somewhere unexpected. He suggested I spend the next week working without a plan, just following whatever seemed interesting. The suggestion made me physically anxious. Work without a plan? Just follow interest? What did that even mean? I called my mother during our next check-in and told her about Professor Watanabe's suggestion. She was furious, her calm therapist voice cracking for the first time I could remember. She said he was trying to sabotage my success because he felt threatened by my disciplined approach. She said academics who couldn't maintain proper structure themselves resented students who could. She told me to ignore his advice and continue with my plan, to focus on producing the deliverables we'd identified as necessary for my application. She said if he gave me a poor evaluation because I didn't follow his unstructured approach, she'd handle it directly with the program director. She reminded me that I'd overcome obstacles before by staying disciplined, and that I couldn't let one professor's jealousy derail years of preparation. I felt relieved hearing her certainty after the confusing conversation with the professor. She always knew what to do, but something had shifted during that conversation with Professor Watanabe. Some small doubt had cracked through the foundation of certainty my mother had built. That night, after completing my scheduled activities, I sat at my desk unable to sleep. I pulled out a blank piece of paper and tried the exercise Professor Watanabe had suggested, just following curiosity without a plan. I started writing down questions that interested me about the research problem, not questions that would lead to publishable results, but questions that I personally wanted to understand. The questions kept coming, filling pages, and I realized I'd never actually asked myself what I wanted to know or understand. All my learning had been directed toward what I needed to know for some future goal. The idea that learning could be for its own sake felt revolutionary and terrifying. I spent the next week trying to work both ways, maintaining my schedule and producing the required deliverables for my mother, while also stealing hours late at night to explore the questions that interested me. The dual existence was exhausting, but for the first time, I felt something, like excitement about intellectual work, rather than just the grim determination to excel. I made progress on a problem approach that came from curiosity rather than methodology, and when I showed Professor Watanabe, his eyes lit up. He said this was the kind of creative thinking he'd been hoping to see from me. He asked what had changed, and I didn't know how to explain that I'd broken one of my mother's cardinal rules. I'd wasted time on something that might not produce results, and it had worked better than my optimized approach. The program ended in early August, and my mother drove up to collect me. I'd won one of the program's awards for outstanding research and had a letter of recommendation from Professor Watanabe, calling me one of the most promising young mathematicians he'd encountered. My mother was pleased with these results, but more interested in discussing how to position them in my college applications. During the 3-hour drive home, she talked about the essay angles we could take and how to frame the experience. She asked detailed questions about my daily schedule during the program, and I found myself lying by omission, not mentioning the late-night exploration sessions, or Professor Watanabe's advice about following curiosity. I felt guilty about the deception, but also protective of those stolen hours that had felt like they belonged to me, in a way nothing else in my life did. Senior year began with the college application process, consuming every available moment. My mother had created a massive spreadsheet tracking deadlines, essay requirements, and supplemental materials for each of her 6 target schools. She'd scheduled time blocks for us to work on applications together every evening after dinner, reviewing my essays and providing detailed feedback. Her edits were extensive, often rewriting entire paragraphs to better position my experiences for what she determined admissions officers wanted to hear. When I pushed back on one particularly heavy edit that made me sound like a different person, she explained that college essays weren't about authentic self-expression, but about strategic self-presentation. She said I needed to tell the story that would get me admitted, not the story that felt most true to my actual experience. The early applications went out in November and the waiting began. My mother had encouraged me to apply to her first-choice school early decision, which was a binding commitment, meaning if I got accepted I had to attend. I'd asked about applying early action instead to keep options open, and she'd explained that early decision gave a statistical advantage and showed commitment that admissions officers valued. When I suggested I wasn't sure that school was my first choice, she pulled out comparison spreadsheets she'd created showing rankings, post-graduation outcomes, and networking opportunities. She demonstrated objectively that this school was the optimal choice, and that my uncertainty was just fear of commitment. I signed the early decision application because arguing seemed futile, and she'd done so much research I couldn't counter her data-driven reasoning. The decision came in mid-December, deferred to regular decision. Not accepted, not rejected, but held for further review. My mother was devastated in a way I'd never seen her. She'd built her entire system around the certainty that following her optimal path would lead to guaranteed results, and this was the first time the system had clearly failed. She scheduled an emergency call with the admissions consultant who reviewed my application materials and suggested that perhaps they'd come across as too polished, too perfectly optimized, lacking the authentic voice admissions officers looked for. The consultant said my essays read like an adult had heavily edited them, and my activities list looked suspiciously perfectly curated. The authenticity issue was what had likely triggered the deferral. They couldn't tell who I actually was behind the performance. My mother rejected this analysis, insisting the consultant didn't understand what top schools really wanted, but I could see the crack in her certainty. She spent the next week revising the strategy for my regular decision applications, trying to add what she called strategic authenticity to my materials. The phrase itself was darkly ironic. How do you strategically be authentic? She had me rewrite essays to sound less polished, to include small vulnerabilities that would seem genuine. She crafted stories about challenges I'd overcome that were technically true, but emphasized emotional elements she'd previously edited out. The applications became exercises in calculated vulnerability, showing just enough imperfection to seem human while maintaining the overall impression of exceptional achievement. I started having panic attacks that winter, waking up at 3 a.m., unable to breathe with my heart racing for no identifiable reason. The first time it happened, I thought I was having a heart attack and almost woke my mother, but managed to calm myself using breathing techniques I found online. The attacks came every few nights, always in those dark, early morning hours when my schedule said I should be sleeping, but my brain wouldn't stop spinning through loops of anxiety about college decisions and whether I'd wasted my entire childhood preparing for a future that might not materialize the way my mother had promised. I didn't tell her about the panic attacks because I knew she'd add another item to the schedule for anxiety management, and the loss of control would make everything worse. Regular decisions came in late March with a brutal pattern. Rejected from 4 of the 6 schools, waitlisted at 1, accepted at the lowest ranked of my mother's target schools with a significant but not full financial aid package. She was devastated and angry in equal measure, insisting there had been some mistake or bias in the process. She called the admissions consultant, who tried to explain that the competition was incredibly fierce and that my application had some red flags around authenticity that had likely hurt me. My mother fired the consultant and hired a different one who specialized in appealing decisions and getting off waitlists. This consultant charged $500 per hour and promised he could get me into one of the better schools if we followed his aggressive advocacy strategy. The waitlist school sent an email in April saying I could submit additional materials demonstrating continued interest. My mother and the new consultant crafted a letter and assembled a portfolio of recent achievements, including a mathematics competition win and updated grades. I was to deliver this in person to the admissions office, which my mother said showed the kind of initiative admissions officers valued. She drove me to the campus on a Saturday morning and waited in the car while I went to the admissions building. The office was closed for the weekend. I stood outside the locked glass doors holding my portfolio and felt something break inside me. Years of optimization, every 15-minute block scheduled, every social interaction sacrificed, every interest suppressed, all leading to standing outside a locked door with materials no one wanted to see. I got back in the car and lied, telling my mother I'd successfully delivered the portfolio to a work-study student who'd been there. She seemed satisfied and started talking about next steps in the waitlist strategy. I stared out the window on the drive home and realized I was drowning. The panic attacks were getting worse, coming during the day now. I'd be sitting in class or working on homework, and suddenly my chest would tighten and I couldn't breathe and the walls would close in. I'd learned to hide it, to excuse myself to the bathroom and ride out the attack in a locked stall. But I was losing the ability to function within the schedule. My mother noticed my grades slipping. I'd gotten a B on a calculus test and an A- on an English essay, and scheduled correction sessions, but I couldn't focus during them. My brain felt like static. In May, I got accepted off the waitlist at the school I'd been deferred from early decision. The aggressive advocacy strategy had worked. My mother was euphoric, calling it a vindication of her system and proof that persistence paid off. She scheduled a celebration dinner at an expensive restaurant and invited her parents and her sister to share the good news. Everyone congratulated me and talked about how proud they were and how all my hard work had paid off. I smiled and thanked them, and felt absolutely nothing except the familiar tightness in my chest that signaled an oncoming panic attack. I excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the floor of the stall trying to remember how to breathe while my family celebrated outside. The summer before college, my mother wanted to maintain my schedule to ensure I didn't lose momentum before starting school. She'd researched the most challenging courses I'd be taking freshman year and arranged for me to get ahead by studying the syllabi and textbooks in advance. She'd created another detailed schedule filling the summer with preparation activities, including a second research program at a different university and an online course in computer science she'd determined would be valuable given technology's role in modern mathematics. I looked at the schedule posted in my room with color-coded blocks filling every 15-minute increment of my summer, and something in me just stopped cooperating. I couldn't do it anymore. The machinery of optimization that had run my life for 12 years just ground to a halt. I told my mother I didn't want to do the research program. She thought I was joking at first, then concerned that something medical was wrong. I explained that I was tired and needed a break and wanted a summer where I could just exist without every moment scheduled. She responded with a correction session that lasted 3 hours, where she systematically explained why taking a break now would jeopardize my college performance, how momentum was crucial, how students who slacked off over summer struggled in fall. She showed me statistics about freshman performance correlating with summer preparation. She reminded me of everything she'd sacrificed to position me for success and how quitting now would waste all that investment. I listened to it all and then said again that I didn't want to do the research program. I wanted time to figure out what I actually wanted instead of executing her plans for my future. She escalated to threats. If I didn't follow the summer schedule, she'd withdraw her financial support for college, leaving me to cover the gap between my aid package and the full tuition. She'd calculated I owed her approximately $200,000 for the tutors, consultants, programs, and her time invested in my optimization over the years, and she'd expect repayment if I rejected the system now. She said I was being selfish and ungrateful after everything she'd done to give me opportunities most kids never got. She said I was throwing away my future because I was too weak to maintain discipline for 3 more months. Her calm therapist voice was gone, replaced by something sharp and desperate. She was watching her system fail in real time and didn't have tools to handle it. I called my father for the first time in years. We'd had minimal contact since the divorce, just birthday cards and occasional awkward phone calls where neither of us knew what to say. My mother had always characterized him as a failure, someone who'd lacked the drive to be successful and would have held me back if she'd let him be involved in my life. I'd internalized this narrative without questioning it, but now I needed someone who existed outside my mother's system, and he was the only person I could think of. I found his number in my phone and called, before I could overthink it. He answered on the 3rd ring, surprised to hear from me, and asked if everything was okay. I told him nothing was okay, and I needed help. We met at a diner halfway between our houses the next morning. I'd left home telling my mother I had a study session at the library, one of the few activities she didn't require supervision for since it was academically productive. My father looked older than I remembered, with gray in his hair and lines around his eyes. We sat in a booth and ordered coffee, and I didn't know where to start. He asked how I was doing, and everything poured out. The schedule, the pressure, the panic attacks, the feeling of drowning, the summer program conflict, the threats about money. He listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from concern to something like horror as I described 12 years of 15-minute increments. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before asking if I'd ever had therapy. I laughed bitterly and said my mother was a therapist. He said that wasn't what he asked. My father explained that what I'd described sounded like severe psychological abuse through coercive control, that scheduling every moment of a child's life and punishing deviation wasn't structure, but domination. He said the panic attacks were my mind's way of trying to break free from an unsustainable situation. He apologized for not staying more involved after the divorce, said he'd let my mother convince him that distance was better for me than exposing me to conflict. He said that was the biggest mistake of his life. He pulled out his phone and started looking up therapists who specialized in family trauma and control dynamics. He said I needed to talk to a professional immediately, someone who could help me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't normal parenting, but systematic abuse. The word abuse hit me like cold water. Everything she'd done had been framed as help, as giving me advantages, as love expressed through structure. I started seeing Dr. Helena Frost twice a week that summer. She specialized in treating adults and teenagers recovering from controlling family systems. Our first session, she asked me to describe a typical day, and I pulled out my phone to show her the schedule. She looked at it for a long time, scrolling through the color-coded blocks, before asking how long I'd been living this way. I told her since age 6, and she took a visible breath before asking how I felt about it. The question confused me because feelings weren't really part of the equation. The schedule was optimized based on research and data, not feelings. She explained that humans weren't machines that could be optimized without psychological cost, and that my panic attacks were my psyche's way of trying to communicate what my conscious mind couldn't acknowledge, that the schedule was destroying me. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Frost helped me understand concepts I'd never considered. She explained that autonomy was a basic psychological need, that humans required some sense of control over their own lives to maintain mental health. She talked about how my mother's system had essentially eliminated my autonomy entirely, making me dependent on external structure because I'd never developed internal motivation or self-direction. She said the fact that I'd excelled academically despite this was a testament to my intelligence and compliance, but that academic success didn't equal psychological health. She asked what I actually wanted to study in college beyond what my mother had planned, and I realized I didn't know. I'd never asked myself that question because my wants weren't relevant to the optimization plan. My father hired a lawyer to review the financial situation. The lawyer, a woman named Isabel Thorne, who specialized in family law, explained that my mother had no legal grounds to charge me for raising me or to demand repayment for educational expenses she'd chosen to provide. She said the threat was a manipulation tactic designed to maintain control through fear. She recommended I document everything in case my mother escalated further, and she helped me understand my legal rights as an 18-year-old about to leave for college. I wasn't a minor anymore subject to my mother's authority. I could make my own decisions, even if she disagreed. The concept felt impossible after 12 years of complete control, but the lawyer assured me it was true. She suggested I open my own bank account that my mother couldn't access and begin financial separation immediately. I didn't attend the summer research program. My mother was furious when I told her, threatening to cancel my college enrollment and make me work to pay her back. I stood in her office where she'd conducted thousands of hours of correction sessions and told her calmly that I was going to college as planned, but I wouldn't be living by her schedule anymore. I was 18 and legally an adult, and she couldn't force me to comply. She escalated to yelling, saying I was ruining my life and would regret this rebellion when I failed out of school. She said I had no idea how to function without her structure and would collapse without her guidance. She said I was too weak and undisciplined to succeed on my own. I let her yell while maintaining the calm I'd learned from Dr. Frost. When she finished, I told her I'd be moving in with my father for the rest of summer, and she could reach me by email if she had logistics to discuss about the college transition. Living with my father was disorienting. He had no schedule for me, no color-coded blocks, no cameras watching my activities. He asked what I wanted for dinner instead of telling me what optimal nutrition required. He let me sleep until I woke up naturally instead of specifying 7 hours exactly. The first few days, I was paralyzed by the freedom, not knowing what to do with unstructured time. I'd sit on the couch in his apartment waiting for someone to tell me what I should be doing, and no one would. My father would suggest things occasionally, want to watch a movie, want to go for a walk, want to get ice cream. All activities my mother would have classified as time-wasting. Doing them felt transgressive and liberating and terrifying. Dr. Frost helped me start building what she called self-directed structure, where I made choices about how to spend time based on my own values and interests, rather than external optimization metrics. She had me start small by choosing what to eat for breakfast, then gradually expand to bigger decisions about how to spend afternoons or which books to read. Every choice required confronting the voice in my head that sounded like my mother analyzing cost-benefit ratios and predicting failure if I chose wrong. Dr. Frost taught me that there was no wrong choice in many situations, that mistakes were information rather than moral failures, and that learning to trust my own judgment required practice and permission to be imperfect. I spent time that summer doing things my mother would have deemed wasteful. I learned to play guitar badly because it seemed fun, not because it would strengthen a college application. I watched movies without educational value. I went to the lake with my father and swam without counting laps or timing myself. I read books because they interested me rather than because they were on approved lists. Each activity felt like rebellion and recovery simultaneously. I was terrible at relaxing, constantly fighting the urge to check a schedule that no longer existed, but slowly, the panic attacks decreased. My body was learning that safety could exist in unstructured time, that not every moment needed purpose to be valid. My mother sent emails throughout the summer that started angry and gradually shifted to pleading. She said she was worried about me and wanted to help but couldn't if I shut her out. She said we should meet with a family therapist to work through our issues. She sent articles about the importance of structure for success in college. She forwarded job postings for tutoring positions I could take to fill my unstructured time productively. She called my father demanding he enforce some kind of schedule to prevent me from wasting the summer. He declined, and she accused him of sabotaging my future out of jealousy for her success in raising me. The accusation was so absurd, given the circumstances, that my father just hung up on her. I moved into my college dorm in late August with my father's help. My mother had wanted to come, but I'd told her through email that I needed space and would contact her when I was ready. She sent one final message the night before I left saying she hoped I'd realize what I was throwing away by rejecting her guidance, that she'd spent 12 years building a foundation for my success and I was choosing to demolish it, and that when I struggled freshman year I shouldn't expect her to fix the damage I'd caused. I read it and then archived it without responding. Dr. Frost had warned me that my mother would likely escalate as she lost control, that people invested in control rarely accepted its loss gracefully, and that maintaining boundaries would require constant reinforcement. My roommate freshman year was a guy named Austin from Minnesota who was studying engineering and played intramural basketball. He seemed perpetually relaxed, doing homework at reasonable hours and then hanging out with floor mates, balancing school with social life in a way that seemed effortless. He asked about my intended major, and I realized I still didn't know. My mother had decided I'd study mathematics, but I wasn't sure if that's what I actually wanted. Austin said most people didn't know freshman year, and that was fine. I could take different courses and figure it out. The idea of figuring it out through exploration rather than optimization was still foreign but appealing. I enrolled in mathematics as planned, but also added courses in philosophy and psychology that seemed interesting, even though they didn't serve an obvious career purpose. The adjustment to college was harder than I'd expected. Without my mother's schedule, I felt unmoored, not knowing how much time to spend on different classes or when to eat or sleep or study. I tried creating my own schedule, but it felt suffocating, triggering the same panic that had built over summer. Dr. Frost, who I was still seeing remotely through video sessions, helped me understand I was trying to recreate the control system as a coping mechanism because uncertainty was so uncomfortable. She encouraged me to try living without a rigid schedule, just responding to deadlines and internal cues about when I needed to study or rest. This felt chaotic and wrong, but gradually I found a rhythm that worked. I studied when I had energy rather than when a schedule dictated. I socialized when people invited me rather than declining based on predetermined social time limits. I got a B on my first college math exam and experienced a full panic attack in the bathroom after class. Years of conditioning equated any grade below A-, with failure requiring correction. But my professor hadn't seemed concerned when reviewing the exam, just noting areas to review for next time. Austin said AB was fine, that it was freshman year and the adjustment period was real. His casualness about grades was incomprehensible given how much weight my mother had placed on perfect academic performance. But I realized that his approach wasn't causing him to fail. He was doing well in his classes while also having a life outside academics. The possibility that there might be multiple paths to success, not just my mother's optimized one, was slowly becoming real to me. My mother violated my boundaries in October by showing up at my dorm unannounced. She'd driven the 3 hours to campus and called me saying she was downstairs and we needed to talk. My stomach dropped, but I'd been preparing for this with Dr. Frost. I went down to the lobby where she was waiting with a binder full of schedules and plans for how I could salvage my freshman year. She said she'd spoken to some of my professors who'd expressed concerns about my performance, and she'd developed an intervention plan. I asked which professors and she got vague, eventually admitting she'd actually just emailed them posing as concerned parent, but they hadn't responded with specifics. She said that didn't matter. What mattered was getting me back on track before I wasted this opportunity she'd worked so hard to create. I told her calmly that I was doing fine, that I had average grades in challenging courses and was learning to balance school with other aspects of college life. She said average wasn't good enough given my potential, that I was wasting my advantages by refusing to optimize my time. She opened the binder to show me the schedule she'd created, color-coded blocks filling every 15-minute increment just like high school. She said if I'd just follow this plan, I could bring my grades up to A's and get involved in research opportunities and build toward graduate school applications. I closed the binder without looking at it and handed it back to her. I said I didn't want her schedule or her plans. I was learning to make my own choices about my time and my future. She looked at me like I was speaking a language she didn't understand. She tried different tactics: concern about my mental health, reminders of how much money she'd invested in my education, appeals to not waste my potential, warnings about career prospects if I didn't excel. When none of that worked, she shifted to anger, saying I was being manipulated by my father, who'd always resented her success, that Dr. Frost was feeding me false narratives about abuse to drive a wedge between us. She said I'd been fine until I let other people poison my mind against her methods. She demanded I stop seeing Dr. Frost and come home for a weekend so we could work through this properly. I told her no to all of it. She'd need to leave campus and communicate only through email going forward. If she showed up again without permission, I'd involve campus security. Her face went from angry to genuinely shocked, like she couldn't believe I was capable of enforcing boundaries. She left, but the email barrage intensified. Long messages analyzing everything I was doing wrong and providing detailed correction plans. Articles about the importance of structure and discipline. Links to research about successful people's habits. Requests for my syllabi so she could create proper study schedules. Demands to meet with my advisor to discuss my course selection. Dr. Frost helped me set up email filters that archived her messages automatically, so I wasn't confronted with them constantly, but could review them in therapy sessions when I was prepared. We analyzed the patterns in her communication, the oscillation between concern and anger, the constant framing of her control as help, the inability to respect boundaries, the threats, and manipulation. Dr. Frost explained this was typical behavior for people losing control of someone they'd dominated, and that the intensity would likely peak before improving. My grades improved second semester as I found better balance. I got mostly A's and one B+, which felt like success given how much less time I was spending on schoolwork compared to high school. I joined a recreational rock climbing club and made actual friends who didn't require pre-approval or scheduled social time. I'd started dating someone from my philosophy class who thought my background was wild when I explained it, but didn't treat me like I was damaged. Life was becoming something I experienced rather than something I executed according to external specifications. The change was subtle but profound. I was developing preferences and making choices and learning who I actually was beyond the optimized performance my mother had constructed. My father suggested family therapy with my mother that spring, saying that completely cutting contact might prevent any possibility of relationship repair and that I might regret that someday. I was resistant, but Dr. Frost said it could be valuable if we set clear parameters. A neutral therapist who understood controlling family dynamics, scheduled sessions with defined goals, my right to leave if I felt unsafe or overwhelmed. My father reached out to my mother with the proposal, and she agreed immediately, probably seeing it as an opportunity to convince a professional that I was wrong to reject her guidance. The therapist, Dr. Marcus Shepard, specialized in family conflict and had experience with control-based dynamics. He met with me individually first to understand my perspective and ensure I wanted to pursue joint sessions. The first family therapy session was in early summer after my freshman year ended. I'd moved in with my father again, rather than going home to my mother's house. She looked smaller somehow when we met in Dr. Shepard's office, less imposing than the figure who'd structured every moment of my childhood. Dr. Shepard established ground rules: no interrupting, no attacking, speaking from I statements about personal feelings rather than accusations about others' behaviors. My mother immediately struggled with this, wanting to present her data and research about optimal parenting. Dr. Shepard gently redirected her to talk about her feelings, and she seemed genuinely confused by the request. She said feelings weren't relevant to effective parenting, that children needed structure, not validation of emotions. Over several sessions, a picture emerged that I hadn't fully understood. My mother's father had been extremely critical and inconsistent, alternating between rage and indifference with no predictable pattern. She'd grown up in chaos and had vowed that her children would never experience that uncertainty. She'd created the schedule system as a way to provide perfect stability, believing that if she controlled all variables, she could protect me from the unpredictability that had traumatized her. She genuinely believed she'd been helping, that structure was love, that optimization was the highest form of parental care. Dr. Shepard helped her begin to see that she'd overcorrected from chaos to suffocating control, that there was middle ground between traumatic unpredictability and complete elimination of autonomy. She struggled to grasp this, insisting her system had produced results, and I'd be grateful once I saw my career success. I tried explaining that career success at the cost of psychological health wasn't actually success, that the panic attacks and years of feeling like I couldn't breathe weren't acceptable trade-offs for good grades. She countered that I'd have had panic attacks from failure if I hadn't been properly prepared, that pressure was inevitable and at least her system provided structure for managing it. We went in circles with her, unable to acknowledge that her system itself had been the primary source of pressure rather than protection against external pressure. Dr. Shepard worked with her on the concept of accountability, explaining that intentions didn't erase harm, that she could have meant well while still causing significant psychological damage. She refused to use the word damage, insisting that couldn't be true when I'd gotten into a top school and was succeeding academically. The breakthrough came in our 5th session, when Dr. Shepard asked my mother what she would have needed as a child to feel safe without complete control. She broke down, describing the unpredictability of her father, never knowing if coming home meant kindness or violence, developing hypervigilance as survival mechanism. She said when I was born she'd promised I'd never feel that uncertainty, that I'd always know exactly what was expected and would never be surprised by inconsistency. Dr. Shepard pointed out that complete control was another form of trauma, even if opposite in expression from chaos, that both eliminated the child's ability to develop their own sense of self. My mother cried in a way I'd never seen, saying she'd tried so hard to give me what she'd needed and couldn't understand how that had been wrong. I felt unexpected empathy mixed with the anger. She'd been wounded and had wounded me trying to heal herself. My mother started her own individual therapy after that session, working on unpacking her childhood trauma and understanding how it had shaped her parenting. Our joint sessions continued but with different energy. She was still defensive and struggled to maintain boundaries, but there were moments where she seemed genuinely interested in understanding my experience, rather than correcting my interpretation of it. She asked what college was like now that I was making my own schedule, and I described the anxiety of unstructured time, gradually giving way to feeling more grounded in my own choices. She said that sounded terrifying to her, and she didn't know how I functioned without clear plans. I said that was exactly the problem. She'd raised me to be functional only within her system, and learning to function in the real world had required unlearning everything she'd taught me. We established limited contact parameters that fall of sophomore year, monthly phone calls where we'd talk about neutral topics, no discussion of schedules or academic performance. She could email about logistics or to share general life updates, but had to respect boundaries around giving advice or planning my time. Holidays would be split between my parents' houses with clear start and end times, so she couldn't extend visits indefinitely. She struggled with all of this, frequently violating the boundaries and requiring reminders, but the trajectory was slowly improving. She was learning that our relationship could only exist if she accepted my autonomy, and I was learning that I could enforce boundaries without being destroyed by her disapproval. We'd never have the relationship she'd envisioned where I implemented her life plans gratefully, but we might eventually have a relationship where we could coexist with mutual recognition of damage done and healing attempted. My sophomore year, I declared a psychology major with a focus on family systems and control dynamics. I wanted to understand what I'd experienced in broader context and potentially help others navigating similar situations. My mother sent a concerned email when she learned this, worried I was choosing a career path based on rebellion against her rather than on true interest and career prospects. I explained that trying to understand controlling family dynamics wasn't rebellion, but integration, making meaning from my experience by learning theoretical frameworks that explained it. She sent back research about psychology career earnings compared to mathematics or engineering, unable to hear that money wasn't my primary metric for life decisions. The exchange highlighted how far apart we still were in fundamental values and how much work we both had remaining. I graduated college 4 years later with honors and no remaining panic attacks. I'd learned to trust my own judgment about how to spend time, developed genuine interests in family therapy and advocacy for kids in controlling households, and built a life that felt authentically mine rather than performed for external approval. My mother attended graduation and seemed proud, though she couldn't help mentioning that if I'd followed her original optimization plan, I'd probably have been valedictorian. My father pointed out that honors was excellent, and that 4 years of college without psychological collapse was its own form of success, given where I'd started. The contrast in their perspectives captured everything. My mother, still measuring outcomes against hypothetical perfection. My father celebrating sustainable progress and genuine growth. I'm in graduate school now studying family therapy, specializing in working with adolescents from controlling environments. My dissertation research focuses on long-term outcomes for children raised in optimization-based parenting systems. My mother thinks it's ironic that I'm pursuing a career in therapy, given how much I've criticized her approach despite her being a therapist herself. She doesn't understand that my criticism was never about therapy generally, but about her specifically using therapeutic language to justify control. We maintain limited contact, and she's mostly learned to respect boundaries, though she still sends occasional articles about parenting research she thinks I should consider. I read them sometimes in therapy with Dr. Frost, who I still see monthly for maintenance, and we analyze what they reveal about my mother's ongoing inability to fully acknowledge the harm done while simultaneously working toward repair. It's complicated terrain we navigate together, this space between complete estrangement and unconditional reconciliation. But I've learned that life is complicated, that healing isn't linear, that I can hold compassion for my mother's trauma while maintaining boundaries against repeating patterns. I've built a life structured by choice rather than optimization, messy and authentic and mine. And some days that's more than enough. It's everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.